We got to defragment our process and put us under one umbrella in one direction, going many different ways. But you got to have a nucleus. And that's what we're trying to gain here at this Afrodescendant Nation Reparations Summit, is a nucleus of black leaders with powerful thoughts and powerful ways to get this thing done, but well organized. So we don't worry about one idea. We like the fact that we got many ideas, but we want those many ideas to form the power. So if we need to hammer someone, we can, right? But you're better able with many different ways to pick up a bottle, to pick up a mic, to pick up a tool and hammer. A fist can't hammer, not in the manner of nailing a nail, but a fist can hammer when we got oppositions. And our opposition is not with each other. Our opposition is against this country that enslaved our people. And so, what do we want? What forms of reparations? That was my introduction.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. That was definitely very brilliant. You know, I'm going to ask Brother Khalfani, because you and I were actually in the same room together on self-determination and vision for reparations. So from your perspective as the lead of that room, what, was the background and the takeaways that you took from the discussion?
I didn't finish mine.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, sorry. Oh, I thought. Well, my bad. That was introduction. Okay, that
was my introduction.
But
it's all good.
No, that's my fault. No, you can continue. You can continue, Brother Ajani.
Now, what do we want? What forms of reparations? One, and it was a resounding message that came across. We want cash payments for our years of enslavement. Number two, we want land, health, and education. Number three, we wanted to know who qualifies and who does not qualify for reparations. And if you would read the definition of Afrodescendant, it really gives you a pretty clear message as to who qualifies. Those people who were brought to the Americas for the purposes of enslavement qualify. Those people who were stolen from their homeland, Africa, for that particular feat, qualify. Those who lost their ties from their original identity, or have partially lost ties from their original identity, qualifies. Those who were discriminated against, racism, murdered, killed, qualify. Those who were raped and were forced into mixed breeding, qualify. And those who today are still suffering the lingering effects of those atrocities, qualify. So that's one of the things we wanted to do, is find out who qualifies. Number four, we want repatriation, we want redemption, and we want freedom. Number five, someone stated in there, we need to tear a page out of the Jewish people's book, because they moved into reparations in a manner where there was no war, there was no gunshot, there was no killings. They went to the United Nations and had an arbitrator arbitrate their case against Germany. And they got land, money, and support. Do you know that the Jews are still being paid reparations? After getting the land in 1945, they're still receiving benefits. So we want to tear a page out of their book. One of the other things they did too, they came together. 23 Jewish organizations created a claims commission. And they were working, like I'm telling you, on all these different angles. And they came together and formed one solidarity movement. And they received reparations, and they received land in Israel. Now, we don't want to do that part. We don't want to displace people from a land that belongs to them. But there's so much land in Africa, in Arabia, that's unoccupied, that we wouldn't mind having a piece of it. Because if you go back to number one, what do we want? Cash payments for our years of enslavement. If that's all we got for reparations, after they buy those Cadillacs, those Corvettes, get a fine home, our reparations spent. So we need reparations to reverse the atrocities we have from here to perpetuity. And if you stayed in America, what does a cash payment do for me when I'm driving black? Does it stop that? So we need more than a cash payment. So one of the things that came out of the meeting is we need to receive reparations in a manner that it fixes the problem. The UN definition says that reparations in all intent should rectify the atrocities, the crimes, as if they never occurred. So if we could go back 400 plus years and got reparations to correct those problems as if they never occurred, they owe us trillions, don't they? Yes. Mm-hmm. So people always say, well, that happened so long ago. What happens when you miss your electric bill? Don't they put a late penalty on it? Mm-hmm. Well, we claiming late charges, America. Yep. You should have paid it when we came out of slavery. And because you didn't, we're charging you late fees. Mm-hmm. Add it up. Trillions of dollars. I'm going to be myself. Number 7. We want sovereignty. We want a nation that we can call our own. We want land equipment. We want sea-going equipment. We want airplanes. We want military weapons. We want military support for the next 40 to 50 years until we can protect ourselves. We want a land where we can fly our own flag and govern ourselves. We want to determine the destiny of our children. We want to determine how we educate. Do we start school at 5? Or our kids so smart, do they start at 3? You stuck in America's culture. And if you think that's your idealism, how much history you learn about yourself in America's school? They got a watered down session on black history. And then they pass over slavery like it was just, we had slaves and we spanked their hands when they didn't do what we tell them to do. That's a lie. We want our own culture. Your culture is not, here comes Peter Cottontail, hopping down the bunny trail, hippity hoppity. Your culture ain't old St. Nick coming down. That's the white man's culture. That's correct, sir. You were white clean during slavery. Stole your language, your religion, and your culture. So we want sovereignty. We want to reestablish ourselves and determine the type of people we want to be. One of the sisters said, we need to create an app to get information and document everything that happened to us in slavery so we can pull it up on our iPhone or our Android. I like that idea. Guess what? In our sovereign nation, if we tear a page out of the Jewish people book, we want dual citizenship. We want to be able to go to that land where our flag flies. And if we want to come back to the U.S., we pull out our U.S. passport. We want dual citizenship like the Jews do. Yes, sir. Correct, sir. I really like this idea. We want white people to organize a 1 million white people march on our behalf of reparation and show your support. March, white folk, march on behalf of black people. I love it too. I want to see them carry banners, carry flags, and we support reparations. You benefited from our slavery, our free labor. They say, well, what you complaining for? Why don't you catch up? It's like a 100-yard dash. You got an 80-yard head start. I don't care if I'm Usain Bolt. I'm not going to get to the finish line. You got 400 years of free labor off the back of my people, and you don't want to pay us for building you this beautiful nation? You owe us, man. So we want to see you get signs and march on Washington. Million of you supporting our cause. And the last thing that came out is that we want to continue these internal meetings. We're going to continue to galvanize our movement. Yes, sir. We want to beat the drums until the drum is deafening, yes, in the ear of our oppressor. Yes, sir. That's right. And then we want to get paid. And for those of us that want to exodus movement of the people, we want to leave. Yes, sir. And for those of you who want to stay, you should stay and still have the money and the support. And you have a nation that if it gets bad over here, like you know it will, yes, you can come home to your own land. Thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And I love the Bob Marley reference, by the way. And I love, big fan of Bob Marley. And because of my faux pas, Brother Kalfani, I'll give you an extra 2 minutes on your presentation. So, as I stated earlier, you were the lead in the self-determination vision for reparations. So, if you can just go ahead and describe the breakout room, how was it, and what were the key takeaways for you? So, go right ahead, brother. The floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Can you all hear me? There we go. Yes, sir. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for being in attendance on day 2. So I was charged with being the lead for the vision for self-determination. And essentially what we wrapped up is their session was what does reparations look like? Ours was how will we implement reparations and where will we be once we receive them? So before we kind of got into the reparations talk, obviously the title is Vision for Self-Determination. So one, we wanted to kind of describe what self-determination was as us as individuals, as well as a collective. So from an individual basis, we charged with self-determination is essentially us choosing for ourselves the path that our life would go down. And how we identified our experiences, our actions with the worldviews. But indifferent of the world, we are who we are. And as a collective, self-determination is the people, one people, having one collective identity, and one land, where we can raise our children, educate our children, feed our children, and determine the outlook for our people, irrespective of another man. So with that, we talked about, we really brought it to self. And as black folk, slavery broke us down. And there's a healing process that has to happen prior to receiving reparations. So we talked about self-healing. I'm going to liken it to Michael Jackson's I'm Starting with the Man in the Mirror. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And we talked about respect for self and loving self, because without that, you can't love your brother. You can't love your sister. You can't love your children properly. But that's that healing process that needs to happen. Then we talked about our relationships with someone else. And we said we have to give our people grace. Grace to allow them to make mistakes, but also grace in allowing them that they have their brother, their sister, their mother, their son next to them every step of the way. And I charged the group with the rebuilt version of the nuclear family, and charged and said, hey, if we're going to unify, we can't unify properly unless we, at our homes, are one people. Yes, sir. Because if we are out attack in our homes, our nation will never be rebuilt. So in that vein, we said, hey, I know we need reparations, but prior to reparations, where some of the democratic states in this country are charging people to disarm, we need to arm and protect ourselves. As you heard Brother Shabazz last night. We are at war. And you cannot expect to protect yourself with locked doors on a land that is not yours, with sticks, or driving electric vehicles that could get shut off by remote access. We don't know. But you need arms, and we need to defend ourselves. Not saying that we're looking for a fight, but we should have the ability to defend ourselves and defend our nation. I liked, there was a Haitian sister yesterday who gave us some education on Haiti and their freedom, as well as some of their plights following when they gained their independence. But what she mentioned was a good person is a good son, a good daughter, a good mother, and a good father. But above all that, a good person, a strong person, is a good soldier. And I cheer for that. And then we moved on to the reparations piece on what will we do with our reparations. And much was discussed in the form of education. I live in the state of Florida, and as you know, our governor is, he's changed a little bit. So we said we would like the ability to educate our own people, our own schools. And then there's an economic system that we want to touch on. So we talked about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we talked about revitalizing that for our people, and that bringing that education to our people, as well as our own agriculture. And then we spoke about the land. So some wanted to say it like, hey, we want to go abroad. Others said we want to stay here in America. But either way, we need fertile land. Land where climate change will not affect it as bad as some of those areas that we're in today. And then we talked about protection, because Black Wall Street was a thing. Key word, was a thing. America destroyed it. So that's where we came with the protection. We need a military force. We need a security detail for our nation, for our people, whether we be abroad or here locally. Then we talked about where will we be? I'll be honest, we didn't really come down to that. It was vast. It was everywhere. Some people said, oh, we can be here, we can be here. But at the end of the day, we discussed one land of our own. The nation, the Jews, they have Israel. Well, they have it. We need a Black Israel for our people. We can be abroad. We know that. We are people all over this globe. But we need one whole nation for Afro-descendants.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We are not Africans anymore.
No, sir.
We've been stripped of that. But we are of African descent. And we have something that brings us together. It may not always be religion. It may not always be our politics. But it is our past, and our future is intertwined with one another.
All right.
I yield back.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Brother Kalfani. I definitely, appreciate that. And that was something that I took away because, you and I were in the same room as well. It was definitely very lively, very productive. And I do agree with what our Haitian sister said regarding Dessalines' viewpoint, what a Haitian is, and that's a viewpoint that we should also embrace. But above all else, you're a good soldier. So there's a slight change in plans into the program. Our other panelists who are going to discuss their key takeaways from the legislative path towards reparations, the strategic reparations plan, they're currently en route. So I'm actually going to invite our next speaker, attorney Natsu Taylor Saito. Going to give an introduction, to this soldier. Natsu Taylor Saito is an activist attorney and a Regents Professor Emerita at Georgia State University, where she's taught courses on international law, human rights, race reparations, and indigenous rights. Sister Natsu, you can actually come up to the podium. I'm not done introducing you yet, but I'm going to finish introducing you, then the podium is yours. For almost 30 years. Her scholarship focuses on the questions of race, citizenship, and the rights of indigenous peoples, national security, and political repression and redress for race-based injuries. Natsu is the author of 3 books, most recently Settler Colonialism, Race and the Law, Why Structural Racism Persists, which was published back in 2020. Okay, great. So without further ado, give it up for attorney Natsu Taylor Saito.
Short. Is that good? Okay, thank you so much.
Just make sure you speak a little louder so people in the live stream can hear you, okay?
Oh, okay. I'm really honored to be here today and appreciate that all of y'all have taken the time to attend. As a long-term faculty member at Georgia State Law School, I'm really pleased that this discussion about reparations is taking place here. We've worked hard for many decades to try to get reparations addressed in this context, and over the decades we've managed on a couple of occasions, but it's always been a struggle. I'd like to start by acknowledging that today we're on land right here at Georgia State from which most of the Muskogee Creek Nation was violently removed. Land that was transformed into the claimed property of European settlers and made profitable for them by the labor of enslaved and exploited people of color. It's the site of a lot of blood, a lot of horror, but also, of course, incredible resistance. And all of this is true not just in the past, but now. The illegal occupation of these lands, the appropriation of their resources, and the exploitation of our communities continues, and of course it continues to be resisted as well. Which gets us to the central question that I'd like to talk about today. And I've been really excited. I'm sorry I couldn't join y'all yesterday. I was at a conference in D.C. where also reparations was being discussed, but I was really pleased just now to hear this clarity about the importance of sovereignty and not just seeing reparations as asking the U.S. government for something for relief. So to the extent that y'all are clear about that, I'm sorry if some of this seems a little unnecessary. But it might be good ammunition, because when we go out there and talk to folks, there is often this belief that we're just asking essentially for charity or handouts or something. One of the central questions that I see here is, how do we get a state to redress injustices when that state still depends on, its existence is founded on those injustices, and it still needs those injustices to exist, right? So we're asking the government to to acknowledge and to change something that is foundational to its very existence. And that's, that puts us in a difficult position. But what I'd like to do is to talk about, with that sort of understanding, to talk about some of the pitfalls I think that we need to be careful of, and some of the things that I find helpful in assessing the steps that we need to take as we move towards obtaining reparations. I come from a Japanese American family that was deeply scarred by internment during World War II, and that motivated me to try to understand the dynamics of racialized power and privilege in this society. And like many Japanese Americans of my generation, I'm third generation in terms of immigration. My grandparents came. I was really skeptical of the redress movement in the 1980s. The United States government had deliberately violated our family's constitutional rights as well as their basic human rights. And these actions were rubber stamped by the Supreme Court on the basis of claims that were known to be false at the time of national security. And I just couldn't see the point. Like, why? Why would we care about a token apology or some token compensation? But luckily, they weren't waiting for me. And as I watched the movement unfold, I realized how much it meant to my parents and grandparents' generations to have their stories move from a painfully personal realm into the light of publicly acknowledged history. Most internees had been so traumatized that they never spoke about their experiences, even to their children. And knowing that, I love the poet Janice Mirikitani's rendition of her mother's response when her mother was told that she had used up the 10 minutes allotted for her testimony to the Congressional Commission on Redress. And she said, "Mr. Commissioner, when you tell me I must limit my testimony, when you tell me my time is up, I tell you this. Pride has kept my lips pinned by nails, my rage coffined, but I exhume my past to claim this time." And I really think that it was only when they were asked for testimony that would become part of an official record that those who had been interned could be assured that their survival was no longer contingent on the determined pride that had kept their rage coffined. And when, based upon the findings of the commission, the U.S. government for the first time in its history apologized for a large-scale race-based wrong and provided some compensation that was not contingent on a forced expropriation of property, it was a vindication that many people had spent their whole lives waiting for. That said, the Japanese-American experience also illustrates some of the pitfalls of winning a struggle for reparations. And I put winning in quotes there. One is that reparations themselves can undermine acknowledgement of the wrong. And so I'm just giving you these examples from this particular sort of micro experience, but I think these are things we need to look out for with respect to any struggle for reparations. In Congress, the redress bill was justified by the loyalty that Japanese Americans had demonstrated, basically by herding ourselves into concentration camps, right? We were rewarded for accommodating rather than resisting the wrong. Those who resisted, and there were a lot of them, were not recognized as the heroes of the story. Another danger is that reparations can disrupt inter- and intra-group solidarity. In our case, redress was used to highlight Japanese Americans as a model minority, a trope that was developed explicitly, intentionally, to blame black and brown communities for their dispossession. And compromises were made in the process of getting what redress was obtained to exclude various classes of people. And so I was also very pleased to hear this very broad definition of who qualifies, because in our case, many groups were excluded, but among them, most, in my mind, extremely significantly, were thousands of Japanese Latin Americans who had been kidnapped from Latin America, interned in the U.S., and then excluded from redress because the government said they were illegal aliens. So they are still 75 years later, they're still continuing to struggle for reparations, 35 years after the redress. And these divisions, of course, that this exclusion created persist. So I think we have to ask, right, for reparations to be meaningful, first, what are the wrongs at issue? We have to have a really clear understanding of what the harm was. Then, what would it take to repair the consequences? And then recognizing that we're not going to get there all at once, right? Do the interim steps that we advocate lead us toward our ultimate goals, or do they short-circuit the process? If we look at when reparations have been granted, or at least seriously considered within the United States, we see repeated attempts to contain the wrongs as mistakes or deviations from a status quo that is at its core equitable and democratic. There's a number of cases related to World War II, of course, and some to specific events, such as the white riots in Rosewood, Florida, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, or what happened in Tuskegee, right? But the narrative in these cases is always that these were exceptional, not a product of structural racism. Similarly, the Indian Claims Commission established in the 1940s acknowledged the wrongful taking of much American Indian land, but it was not empowered to return any of it. Okay? Reservations and, the so-called federal benefits that American Indians get are not reparations. Okay? Congress apologized for the illegal overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii, but it continues to disregard Native Hawaiian sovereignty. Recently, of course, we've seen this much needed revival of serious discussions about reparations for African Americans or Afro-descendants, which is, I understand that's a very different, an important, significantly different framing. But the problem in many of these discussions, clearly not here, is often framed narrowly, right, as a wrong turn that was somehow taken by an otherwise sort of salvageable system. And if that were the case, right, some straightforward remedies might be agreed upon. And I think any kind of redress has social, economic, and psychological value. Nonetheless, if the problems we're talking about are structurally rooted and the institutions that generated the horrors of slavery and subsequent racial subordination are left intact, they will continue to perpetuate systemic inequalities. So this is, what was being referenced a few minutes ago about, you can get a lot of money and still continue to be stepped on. And one problem, of course, is that these inequalities and this ongoing exploitation and dispossession will be compounded by what will be taken advantage of as a perception that the playing field is now level and society has no general responsibility for ongoing problems. So I think that y'all have been talking about international law. I just want to reiterate that because remedial options under U.S. law, sorry, I'm a lawyer, so I have to talk about laws once in a while. Remedial options under U.S. law are, of course, really limited, right? So it's useful to remember that under international law, when a wrongful act has occurred, the party responsible for the injury is obligated to provide redress. Now, the goal, the first priority of redress, what's supposed to happen, is to restore the status quo ante, right? To put things back to where they would have been had that wrongful act not occurred. Where that's not possible, and only after you've tried to make that possible, right, then we turn to compensation, satisfaction, and measures of rehabilitation, right? Compensation is supposed to address actual losses that can't be remedied by restitution, where you can't actually put things back to the way they were. And satisfaction addresses the non-material injuries. States are responsible for ceasing illegal actions and for providing guarantees of non-repetition. And perhaps most importantly, the perpetrator, right, doesn't get to determine what the form or the extent of the remedies will be. So we may not, immediately be able to get international law enforced, right? But this vision, this perspective can help us broaden our vision, and it frees us to contemplate what kind of society or societies we want to live in and to leave to future generations. As we continue the centuries-long struggle for reparations for Afro-descendants, I think we have to recognize that reparations can take many forms and serve many purposes, but we also have to be aware that they can be problematic and exacerbate problems in the process. There's always the danger that financial compensation or apologies or memorials will be invoked to legitimize the state, right? To relegate the harm to the past, to sow division by rewarding certain groups and not others, to silence those who remain dissatisfied, and to subvert attempts to identify and address the sources or causes of the injustice. At the same time, they're necessary. Reparations are necessary, absolutely, right? And they can be both healing and empowering. And so we build the future one step at a time. And the question is whether the steps we're taking now are reinforcing our dispossession or leading us in a liberatory direction. And in making this assessment, I think it helps to think about three key elements. For me, anyway, this is my sort of lens of thinking about, are we moving in the right direction? And that has to do with the elements of truth, dignity, and power. Are we exposing historical truth? Are we enhancing human dignity? And does the process, as well as the result, empower those who are harmed by the violation? Truth is critical because we can't build a liberated future on lies about the present or the past. We have to ensure that all people's histories are reflected in the historical record and incorporated into social narratives. Even though we aren't going to be able to address all the harms inflicted on our communities, an accurate accounting is critical. And that's why I think it's really important, the work that's being done on the data that's being collected about the economic benefits that the institution of chattel slavery provided for the colonizing powers globally and in the U.S. is really important, right? People often say that's just a waste of time because it's not realistic to think that those who are now wealthy and powerful as a result of this exploitation are going to even think about repaying such enormous sums. And in that sense, no doubt, they don't want to do that. But establishing the truth gives us a reference point from which to begin negotiating, right? And it clarifies that we're not asking for handouts or charity or development aid, but just a small portion of what's legally due. Another touchstone is dignity, which is the key really to all human rights. It means being respected as a full human being in the dynamic, organic context of community, culture, history, and identity. It means having the freedom to act on one's responsibilities, our responsibilities to our families and communities, to future generations, to other forms of life, to the earth itself. Dignity is not a right that's granted by those in power, right? But one that can be realized, sometimes at great personal cost, even under the most repressive conditions. And finally, as we engage in struggles to obtain meaningful redress for past injustices, we cannot cede power to those who perpetuate injustice. We have to recognize and build on the power of our communities. Justice is not going to come in the form of charity or grants, right, or government aid. These may be necessary to the survival of our communities, but they can't liberate us. Empowerment is not the same thing as equal protection or assimilation. Right? Equality under the law helps prevent abuse, but it's not a remedy. Okay? Assimilationism is illusory for many reasons, but because it requires, foremost, I think, because it requires us to relinquish our independent identities, cultures, histories, and worldviews. Right? Assimilation represents the ceding of power. Real empowerment, as has been discussed just now, entails exercise of the right to self-determination. A right that is the right of all peoples. That is the first line of the first article of both of the two major human rights covenants that the UN has promulgated. Right? All peoples have the right to self-determination. Okay? So, and I won't go into that more because I know you've been talking about that, but I just wanted to wrap up by remembering law professor Dorothy Roberts' question, right? She says, how do we rectify a system that so brilliantly serves its intended purpose? And I think this sums up the dilemma that we have in demanding redress from a state that owes its very existence to the wrongs at issue. Ultimately, I don't think we'll find a singular or objective answer to remediating foundational wrongs, but we can assess what measures are empowering, what enhances our collective well-being, respects our dignity, and restores balance to our world. And when we pursue those measures, we're liberating ourselves. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Ms. Natsu. That was very brilliant in terms of like breaking down like the history and the issues that ran with the Japanese reparations movement. So I'm going to invite Brother Cam Howard to come up to be on part of the panel. Before we continue on with the panel discussion, I want to go over the rules of conduct. Be respectful. That means silence your cell phones. If I hear a cell phone go off again, I will ask security to escort you out. This is the first and only time I'm going to say it. Silence your cell phones. Pretend this is the movie theater. Silence your phones. Thank you. So, without further ado, I'm going to start. We have the Honorable President General Akila Mukaram, and we have Brother Cam Howard. So, Brother Cam Howard, in terms of the breakout room you were in, the legislative path towards reparations, what were the takeaways that you thought were very important, as well as giving your experience on the legislative path and how that would go about?
So unfortunately, I didn't take notes because I didn't know that I would be here doing this. Brother Malik Zulu-Shabazz, who was our keynote speaker last night, he was the facilitator and was supposed to report back, but I understand that he couldn't get back here in time. So I'm going to try to do my best to share what was discussed in our breakout group. Although it was entitled legislative, it took a different lens than what we normally think when we talk about legislative. We were talking about legislative within the U.S. context. But it was mostly around how do we democratically, as a people, determine how we want to address our reality here in this country. And we determined, and there was a lot of talk, as Malik talked about during his keynote, around the use of a plebiscite to make that democratic determination. We, as our last speaker just talked about, we have a right to be self-determined. We are 44 million people in this country that they don't have a national identity that's recognized anywhere on the planet. You have 55 countries in Africa, and probably only 10 have more populations than us here in this country, if that many. There's some African nations that have 2 and 3 million people, but they have full rights of governments and, that America has on the international level when it comes to participation in the United Nations. And so part of our reality and part of our reparations struggle is determine whether or not we are going to be a individual or a national entity within this country or continue to exist as what are called political minorities, as opposed to a national minority. A national minority is recognized in international law as a group of people who were there at the formation of a nation, have their own particular reality, particular culture, and that were instrumental in the forming of that nation. In America, there are about 300 nations that fulfill those criteria. And those 300 nations are primarily indigenous nations. There are over about 300 indigenous nations in America. It's a multinational state, and they're recognized as national minorities. We are not recognized as a national minority. Of course, their land was instrumental to the formation of America, and they were here at the time America was formed. Our labor was instrumental to the formation of America, and we were here at the time America was formed, which gives us the criteria of being national Americans, national minorities, and the agreement to claim our national minority status has to begin with us self-defining as an Afrodescendant nation, as Afrodescendants, or something else. But certainly we have to make that claim in order for us to get those rights, in order for us to demand those rights of self-determination as outlined in various U.S. human rights, various international human rights documents. So we focused on the plebiscite. And a plebiscite, as we talked about in our session, is simply a vote. It's a vote that has particular questions directed at a particular population to determine the way that particular population wants to proceed on a particular question. And Brother Malik gave a number, an 800 number. that we in that particular space, we dial that number, we text that number, and we text reparations to that number, and they provided us with 4 or 5 questions. I'm gonna read those questions. And this is a preliminary, a test, if you will, of the type of questions we would have on a national plebiscite for our determination to self-identify as national minorities in this country, and that we can proceed that forward with that form of reparations. But the number was, and you can text this now if you like, but the number is 877, and he gave it out again at the town hall, but 877-506-2184, and you text reparations, and the first question you get is, do you self-identify as an Afro-descendant, yes or no? The second question would be, do you declare your right to receive full and complete reparations, yes or no? Third question, do you declare your right to self-determination, your right to have complete control over your affairs as a people and to govern ourselves? As national minorities, we have the right to form our own governments, right? That's the sovereignty that we talk about. We cannot have reparations and still be under domination, as our last speaker stated, and still be under domination of this American government. So we have to say, yes, we declare our right for self-determination, our right to self-govern. That means creating our own security police forces, as my brother stated, in our communities, and kicking them out. We have that particular right. Those are rights that come with the government. And we can declare that on this land because it's already a multinational state. Right? This is just be adding 1 more, or 2 more, or 3 more. We don't have to all say we're going to be one nation. We have the right to be several nations. But let's start off with Afrodescendant Nation. And then the fourth question was, do you declare your right to independence and your right to establish a state or territory of your own? In our group, we were all asked to say how we self-identify. And Brother Malik was trying to get us to, after 6 hours in the space, everybody said, I'm Afro-descendant. So Brother Malik was saying, well, no, what were you before you came in? So brother finally said, well, I consider myself a Black American before I came, but I am Afro-descendant as well. Yes, and so the thing was, he wanted us to be clear, you can say you're an African American and Afro-descendant, a Black American and Afro-descendant. And I had stated that I'm a conscious citizen of the Republic of New Africa and Afro-descendant. The Republic of New Africa put forth this idea that we're new Africans. We're not the Africans that came, that our ancestors came. We lost the language, we lost all those things that Honorable Silas Muhammad put forth in the definition of Africa. Still in African cultural roots. But we're new Africans. Same way when Europeans came here, they named New Amsterdam. They said they were, or New York, or new spaces back in Europe. And so we said we were new Africans, and that we had a right to be self-governing, and the first thing they did was they initiated a declaration, which was a declaration of independence from this government, that we are no longer the dictates of this government. And we have to do that. We have to declare our independence from this government. We say we're going to be a nation, we have to declare our independence. And so that's